When I set a Google alert for my own name 3 years ago, it was for professional vanity, not to find out my husband had forged my signature to sell my $1.5 million Aspen cabin for the price of a mid-range sedan. Ryan thought he was a financial genius covering his gambling debts with a quiet real estate deal, but he forgot he was married to a lead compliance officer who serves federal indictments over slow-roasted lamb. My name is Harper Vance, and at 34 years old, I have built a reputation that precedes me into every room. I am the Senior Compliance Director at Meridian Global Solutions in Seattle, a title that sounds dry until you realize that I am the person who decides if a company survives a federal audit or implodes under the weight of its own negligence. I have a terrifying attention to detail. My eyes do not just scan spreadsheets, they dissect them. In my world, a decimal point in the wrong place is not a mistake. It is a confession. I was currently sitting at the head of a mahogany table in our 42nd floor conference room, staring down a vendor who thought he could hide a 3% surcharge in the footnotes of a logistics contract. The air conditioning was humming, but the man across from me was sweating through his collar. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice barely raised above a whisper. "You listed the fuel surcharges under miscellaneous overhead in column D, but you also applied a standard carrier rate in column F. That is double billing. Harper, look, it's just a standard formatting template we use," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room for an ally that did not exist. We can adjust it." "You will not adjust it," I replied, closing the folder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot. "You are terminated. We do not do business with thieves." I walked out of the meeting feeling the familiar hum of adrenaline. I loved the precision of my job. It was black and white, correct or incorrect. It was nothing like my marriage. Ryan was the chaos to my order. He was a charming, handsome man who called himself a serial entrepreneur, which was a polite way of saying he was unemployed and had a gambling problem he thought I didn't know about. He was always chasing the next big thing: crypto, dropshipping, flipping vintage cars. I paid the mortgage. He paid for dreams that never materialized. I tolerated it because I loved him, or at least, I loved the version of him that made me laugh when I came home exhausted. But there was one thing I kept entirely separate from Ryan, my cabin in Aspen. It was a $1.5 million property of cedar and stone that I had inherited from my late grandmother. It was my sanctuary, and legally, it was a premarital asset kept solely in my name. During my lunch break, I sat in my office with a kale salad I had no intention of eating. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an automated email notification. Sender Pitkin County Clerk and Recorder. Subject Deed Transfer Confirmation. I frowned. My first thought was that it was a phishing scam. Sophisticated hackers were always trying to get into Meridian's servers. But something in my gut tightened. A primitive instinct that had saved me from bad contracts 1,000 times before. I did not click the link in the email. Instead, I opened a secure browser and navigated to the official county portal. I logged in. The page loaded slowly, spinning for 10 seconds that felt like 10 years when the document appeared on the screen. The air left my lungs. It was a recorded deed. The property at 442 Pine Ridge Road, my grandmother's house, had been sold yesterday. "No," I whispered. That's not possible." I scanned the details. The buyer was listed as Obsidian Holdings, LLC. The sale price was $60,000. I stared at the number. $60,000. For a prime Aspen property sitting on 2 acres of land, that was less than the down payment I had made on my car. It was virtually a giveaway. I clicked to view the scanned document and zoomed in on the signature line. There, in black ink, was my name, Harper Vance. It was a forgery, and it wasn't even a good one. The slant was too aggressive, the loops too wide. It looked like someone had practiced my signature a dozen times and still failed to capture the muscle memory of my hand. Below it was a notary stamp for a woman named Elena Rodriguez in a town called Aurora. a place I had not visited in 6 months. I checked the timestamp on the digital filing. The documents were signed and notarized yesterday afternoon at 2:30. I pulled up my shared calendar with Ryan. I remembered yesterday perfectly. I had been in meetings all day. And Ryan, his calendar block for 2:30, simply read, Gym. He had not been at the gym. He had been forging my signature to sell my inheritance for pennies on the dollar to a shell company. My heart should have been racing. I should have been hyperventilating or crying or throwing my phone against the wall. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, a cold, clinical rage washed over me. It was the same feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a ledger, only 1,000 times more potent. Okay, Ryan, I said softly to the empty office, if that is how you want to play it. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the deed and the transfer receipt. I created a new folder in my encrypted cloud drive, labeled it Tax Receipts, and uploaded the evidence. Then I locked my phone, stood up, and smoothed the front of my blazer. I walked back into the boardroom for the afternoon session with a stoic expression. No one at the table knew that my husband had just declared war on me, and they certainly didn't know that he was going to lose. The drive home was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and criminal statutes, while most wives discovering infidelity might focus on the emotional betrayal. My mind was categorizing Ryan's actions into legal buckets: forgery, wire fraud, grand larceny, money laundering. The wipers slashed back and forth, matching the rhythm of my thoughts. He had not just cheated on me, he had stolen from me, and he had done it with the clumsy arrogance of a man who thought he was smarter than the woman who audited Fortune 500 companies for a living. I pulled into the driveway of our modern minimalist home. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Ryan in the kitchen. He was moving with a bounce in his step, wearing an apron over his dress shirt, a glass of red wine in his hand. He looked like the picture of a devoted husband. It made my stomach turn. I walked through the front door, composing my face into a mask of tired affection. "Hey, babe." Ryan called out, rushing over to kiss me. He tasted like Merlot and garlic. "I decided to make your favorite tonight. Risotto with scallops. Hard day." "The usual," I said, dropping my bag on the island. Contracts, compliance, people trying to hide things they shouldn't. I watched his eyes. There was a flicker of something fear, perhaps, but he masked it quickly with a wide, boyish grin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. "Well, maybe this will make it better," he said, sliding the box across the marble counter. "My crypto investments finally popped. I wanted to treat you." I opened the box. Inside sat a pair of diamond stud earrings. I studied them, not as a wife receiving a gift, but as an appraiser examining assets. The cut was decent, the clarity average. They probably cost around $3,000. I did the math instantly. If he had sold my cabin for $60,000 yesterday, this was his way of laundering a small portion of the proceeds back to me to alleviate his guilt. He was buying my silence with my own money. "Ryan, these are beautiful," I said, forcing a smile. "Are you sure we can afford this?" "Absolutely," he insisted, waving his hand dismissively. "I told you, the market is turning around. We are flush." I put the earrings on, the cold metal against my skin feeling like a brand. I needed to see how far he would go. I needed to see him squirm. "Since we are celebrating," I said, leaning against the counter and crossing my arms, "I was thinking about the holidays. We haven't been to the cabin in ages. Let's spend Christmas in Aspen. I can book the flights tonight." The reaction was immediate. The color drained from his face. He set his wine glass down a little too hard, splashing a drop of red onto the white counter. "Aspen," he repeated, his voice jumping an octave. "Oh, honey, I don't think that's a good idea right now." "Why not?" I asked, keeping my tone light, almost playful. "It is perfect this time of year." "Well, remember that storm last month? he stammered, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. I got an email from the property manager. Apparently, a pipe burst. It is a mess up there. Major plumbing repairs needed. The floors are torn up. Water everywhere. It is not habitable. I watched him lie. It was fascinating in a morbid way. There was no property manager. I managed the property myself. There was no burst pipe. The only thing broken was the deed he had forged. That is terrible, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. I should fly out there and check on the contractors. No, he shouted, then cleared his throat, trying to lower his volume. I mean, no. You are too busy. I am handling it. I don't want you to stress. How about Cabo instead? Let's do Mexico. Sun, sand, margaritas. My treat. He was desperate to keep me away from Colorado. He needed time to flip the money, buy the property back, or vanish. He thought he was managing the situation. Mexico sounds nice, I said softly. You are right. I don't need the stress. Visibly relieved, Ryan exhaled a breath he had been holding for 10 seconds. Great. It is a date. Now, sit down. Dinner is almost ready. I just need to finish up a report for tomorrow first. I lied. Go ahead and eat without me. I will be down in 20 minutes. I walked upstairs to my home office and locked the door. The moment the lock clicked, my demeanor shifted. I was no longer the tired wife. I was the senior compliance director. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I did not log into my work email. Instead, I opened a fresh browser window. I needed to know everything. A divorce was inevitable, but a simple separation was not enough. You do not sell a $1.5 million asset for $60,000 unless you are in trouble so deep that logic has left the building. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. I was going to peel back every layer of his financial life until I found the rot at the center. I would behave normally. I would wear the earrings. I would eat the risotto. I would smile and plan a trip to Mexico. And while he slept beside me, thinking he had gotten away with it, I would be building the cage that would trap him forever. I waited until the sound of running water echoed from the master bathroom. Ryan liked long, scalding showers, which gave me exactly 15 minutes. I slipped out of the home office and into the living room where he had left his laptop open on the coffee table. I woke the screen. It asked for a password. I typed in 1990, his birth year. It unlocked immediately. The lack of security was almost insulting. He did not even think I was smart enough to try to look. I went straight to his email client and searched for Obsidian. The results populated instantly, but they were not from a real estate brokerage. They were from a man named Silas Thorne. I clicked on the most recent thread. The subject line read Final Notice. Silas, please. Ryan had written in a reply sent 2 days ago. I can get you the asset. I just need you to hold off on the interest payment. The cabin is worth over $1 million. It covers everything. I don't want the cabin. Ryan. Silas had replied, I want liquidity, but I will take the deed as collateral. We transfer it to the LLC for $60,000 to make it look legal. If you don't pay the remaining $340,000 by January 1st, I keep the property and I liquidate it. Do we have a deal? My breath hitched. It was not just a sale. It was a collateral transfer for a predatory loan. Ryan was in debt for $400,000. I dug deeper. I found emails referencing sports betting sites and high-risk crypto platforms. He had not just been unlucky. He had been reckless. He had gambled away our savings and then borrowed from a shark to try and win it back. I opened a new tab and logged into the Meridian Global Solutions remote server. I needed the power of my corporate tools. I accessed LexisNexis, a database that costs more per year than most people make in a decade. I ran a search on Obsidian Holdings LLC. It was a ghost. Delaware registration. No website. The registered address was a P.O. box in a strip mall in Wilmington. But then I cross-referenced the registered agent. It linked back to a shell company owned by Silas Thorne. I searched for the notary. Elena Rodriguez. It took me 3 minutes to find her Instagram profile. It was public. The first photo was of her sitting on the lap of a man who looked like a sleek, dangerous version of a Wall Street banker. The caption read, "Me and my king. Silas. Got you," I whispered to the empty room. This was a conspiracy. Silas Thorne had set up the LLC. His girlfriend had notarized a forged signature, and my husband had handed them the keys to my inheritance because he was too terrified to tell me the truth. This was wire fraud. It was forgery. It was money laundering. I heard the water shut off upstairs. I moved fast. I forwarded every damning email to my secure account. I downloaded the PDF of the loan agreement Ryan had signed. I took screenshots of the text messages that synced to his laptop. I walked to the printer in my office and hit print. Page after page of evidence slid out. I hole-punched them with mechanical precision. I took a thick, plain binder from my shelf and slid the stack of papers inside. On the spine, I wrote in black marker tax returns 2024. I placed the binder on the shelf next to the others, hiding the smoking gun in plain sight. For a second, the adrenaline faded, and I felt a crushing weight in my chest. My husband had sold me out. He had looked me in the eye, kissed me, and lied, all while giving away the one place on earth where I felt safe. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run upstairs and shake him until his teeth rattled. "Harper," Ryan called out from the top of the stairs. "Did you find that report?" I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, shoving the heartbreak into a steel box in my mind. I locked it tight. "Just finished it," I yelled back, my voice steady and light. "I am pouring wine. Do you want a glass?" I was not going to cry. I was going to destroy them. The next morning, I walked into the legal department at Meridian holding 2 cups of black coffee. I found Marcus, a tax attorney with a sharp mind and a loose tongue, sitting in his corner office. I slid one of the cups onto his desk and closed the door. "Hypothetically," I started, leaning against the wall and keeping my voice casual. "What happens if a property appraised at $1.5 million is transferred for $60,000? Marcus laughed, taking a sip of the coffee. "Hypothetically, that is not a real estate transaction. Harper, that is a neon sign for money laundering. The IRS would view that as gift tax evasion at best. At worst, it is wire fraud. Why do you ask?" "Just a case study I was reading." I lied smoothly. "Thanks, Marcus." I walked back to my office, my heels clicking a rhythm of war on the tile floor. My suspicion was confirmed. This was federal territory. I sat at my desk and turned my attention back to Silas Thorne. I dug past his glossy landing pages and Instagram reels until I found a message board buried on the 3rd page of Google results. It was a forum for victims of wealth coaching scams. The stories were identical to what I suspected. He promised me 20% returns in a month. One user wrote, "Then he said my capital was frozen and I needed to pay a release fee. He took my pension." Another wrote, "Do not sign anything with this man." I realized then that Ryan was not just a victim of a bad loan. He was an accomplice. He had willingly entered into a conspiracy to defraud me because he was too cowardly to face his own failures. And then I found the smoking gun that turned my sadness into pure, cold hate. It was a draft email in Ryan's sent folder. He was setting up a lease agreement with Obsidian Holdings. He intended to pay Silas $5,000 a month to rent the cabin back. I checked the source of funds he planned to use our joint checking account. He was going to use my salary to pay rent on my own house to the man who stole it. My cell phone rang, jarring me from the screen. It was Mrs. Gable, my neighbor in Aspen. "Harper, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't want to pry, but there are some rough-looking men at your cabin. They are backing a van up to the front door." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "What are they doing? Mrs. Gable?" "They are moving furniture," she whispered. "They just brought out that beautiful leather sectional." And, oh my, they are taking the rugs. I closed my eyes. That sectional was custom Italian leather. The rugs were heirlooms from my grandmother. They were stripping the place. Should I call the sheriff? Mrs. Gable asked. It looks like they are looting the place. My finger hovered over the hang-up button. My instinct was to scream yes. I wanted sirens. I wanted handcuffs. But then my compliance brain took over. If the local sheriff showed up, the men would produce the deed. It would look like a civil dispute between a new owner and a previous owner. Ryan would claim it was a misunderstanding. He would get a slap on the wrist, and Silas would disappear into the wind. No, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. Do not call the sheriff. Let them take it. But, Harper, it is fine. Mrs. Gable, I interrupted gently. Thank you for telling me. I hung up and stared at the wall. I did not want the Aspen police. I needed leverage that Ryan could not talk his way out of. I needed an agency that ate wire fraud for breakfast. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the FBI field office website. I clicked on the tab for the white-collar crime division. I did not just leave a vague anonymous tip. I offered them a silver platter. I have a complete paper trail proving wire fraud, forgery, and money laundering involving a multi-state real estate scheme. I typed. I have the emails, the bank transfers, and the forged deed. I am the victim, and I can deliver the perpetrators. I hit send. That night, while Ryan slept beside me, oblivious and breathing softly, I sat on the floor of my walk-in closet. I held my phone to my mouth and hit record on the voice memo app. My name is Harper Vance, I whispered into the microphone. On December 8th, I discovered my signature was forged on a deed transfer for my property in Aspen. I had no prior knowledge of this transaction. I am recording this to establish a timeline of events and to prove that I am not a co-conspirator in my husband's fraud. I stopped the recording. It was my insurance policy. If the feds came for Ryan, they might come for me too. I had to be bulletproof, but evidence was not enough. I needed a confession. I needed Ryan and Silas in the same room, comfortable, arrogant, and thinking they had won. I needed them to brag about the crime while a federal agent listened in. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a hunter. Dinner, I whispered. We are going to have a dinner party. I met Agent Miller in a nondescript coffee shop 3 towns over from where I worked, a place where the linoleum was peeling and the air smelled of burnt espresso. He was younger than I expected, wearing a rumpled suit that screamed government salary. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I placed the heavy binder labeled Tax Returns 2024 on the sticky laminate table between us. It is all there, I said, my voice low and steady. The emails, the forged signature, the bank transfers, the link between Obsidian Holdings and Silas Thorne. Miller flipped through the pages, his eyebrows rising with every turn. He stopped at the flowchart I had made connecting the shell companies to the scam network. We have been building a RICO case against Thorne for 18 months, Miller said, looking up at me with a mix of surprise and professional respect. We knew he was washing money through commercial real estate, but we could never pin a specific theft on him that would stick. He is slippery, but this is the smoking gun. He got greedy. I don't care about your RICO case, I said flatly. I want my house back, and I want to make sure that when you take them down, I am not standing in the blast radius. I want full immunity in writing. Miller nodded slowly, closing the binder. If you cooperate, we can consider you a confidential informant and a victim, but we need to catch them in the act. We need them to admit to the conspiracy on tape to ensure the charges stick. I can get you that, I replied, feeling a cold resolve settle in my stomach. I will host a dinner. I will get them comfortable. You just be ready to kick down the door. I drove home, rehearsing the hardest performance of my life. I had to look the man who stole from me in the eye and tell him I was proud of him. When I walked through the door, Ryan was pacing the living room. He looked pale, likely sensing that the walls were closing in on his secret. I dropped my keys on the counter, the sound making him jump. "Ryan," I said, letting a slow, admiring smile spread across my face. I saw the transfer notification. At first, I was confused, but then I looked at the market trends. Ryan froze, his eyes wide with panic. "Harper, I can explain. It is just temporary. Please don't be mad." "Shh," I interrupted, walking over to place a hand on his chest. "You don't have to explain. You leveraged a non-performing asset to free up liquidity for high-yield investments. It is bold. It is aggressive. Honestly, I didn't think you had it in you." The relief that washed over him was pathetic. He slumped against the counter, letting out a shaky laugh. You aren't mad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Mad?" I laughed softly. "I am impressed. You finally stopped playing small. That cabin was just sitting there gathering dust. If we can flip that money into something bigger, I am all in." Ryan straightened up, his chest puffing out. The fear vanished, replaced instantly by the arrogance that had gotten him into this mess. "Exactly," he exclaimed. "That is what I have been saying, Silas. He is a visionary. He showed me how to make the money work for us. I knew you would understand the vision eventually." "I do," I said, lying through my teeth. "In fact, I want to meet him. I have a bonus coming in next month, about $50,000. I was going to put it in an index fund, but maybe I should invest with you boys instead." Ryan's eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. Really, Silas would love that. He is always looking for sophisticated investors. "Invite him to dinner," I said. "This Friday, a closing celebration. Just the three of us and his partner. I want to celebrate our new venture." "I will text him right now," Ryan said, pulling out his phone with trembling excitement. I turned away, pretending to check the mail so he wouldn't see the look of absolute loathing on my face. I pulled out my own phone and typed a message to a number saved only as M. "The table is set for Friday, 7 o'clock. I hit send. The trap was armed. The week leading up to the dinner passed in a blur of domestic theater that would have won me an Academy Award. I woke up every morning and made Ryan coffee. I kissed him on the cheek. I listened to him ramble about liquidity and leverage while I mentally calculated the sentencing guidelines for federal wire fraud. I cooked his favorite pot roast on Tuesday, watching him eat with gusto while I imagined him staring at a tray of prison loaf. It was terrifying how easy it was to lie to him. But then again, he had been teaching me how to do it for years. I did not want to cook for the main event, though I wanted the night to feel expensive. I visited the most exclusive caterer in Seattle and ordered a menu that screamed excess. "I want the Wagyu beef," I told the event planner, tapping my credit card on her glass desk. "And the truffles? And 3 bottles of the 1996 vintage Cabernet. Cost is not an issue." "Is it a special occasion?" she asked, eyeing my ring. "We are celebrating a closing," I said, a small, sharp smile playing on my lips. "It is going to be a night to remember." I needed a costume for the role I was about to play. I went to a boutique downtown and bought a dress that looked like armor. It was black, structured, with sharp shoulders and a neckline that plunged just enough to be distracting. It was not something a victim would wear. It was something a villain would wear. When I tried it on in the dressing room, I didn't see a heartbroken wife in the mirror. I saw the Grim Reaper in silk. On Thursday night, Ryan came home with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He looked nervous again, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he approached me in the kitchen. "Hey, babe," he started, clearing his throat. "So, Silas sent over some paperwork. Since you are technically an investor now, he wants to keep everything above board. It is just a standard NDA, to protect his proprietary strategies." I took the document. It was a non-disclosure agreement, poorly drafted, likely by Silas himself. It demanded that I never speak about the transaction regarding the Aspen property or the financial dealings of Obsidian Holdings to any third party, under penalty of a $500,000 lawsuit. I almost laughed. A contract written to conceal a felony is void ab initio, invalid from the start. You cannot legally enforce silence regarding a crime. Of course, I said, grabbing a pen. I love how professional this is. It makes me feel safe. It is all about protection, Ryan said, relaxing as he watched the ink dry on the page. Silas is very private. I bet he is, I murmured. The next morning, the day of the dinner, I executed the final phase of my asset protection plan. I went to the bank and accessed our safety deposit box. I placed my grandmother's pearls, my passport, and the diamond earrings Ryan had bought me with stolen money inside. If things went sideways, I needed to be able to leave the country, though I doubted it would come to that. While I was at the branch, I sat down with a teller. I need to make a withdrawal from the joint savings account, I said. I want to withdraw exactly 50% of the balance in the form of a cashier's check made out to my separate personal account. The teller looked at the screen. That is a significant amount. Mrs. Vance, is everything all right? Everything is fine, I said. Just diversifying. I left exactly half the money for Ryan. When the FBI froze his assets, I wanted the record to show that I took only what was legally mine. I was not stealing. I was severing. I spent the afternoon preparing the stage. I checked the tiny, high-definition cameras I had hidden in the ficus plant and on the bookshelf. The angles were perfect. They would capture every expression, every bead of sweat, and every admission of guilt. I sat at my desk and reviewed the script I had written for the toast. I had memorized specific phrases designed to trigger affirmative responses for the wire agent Miller had taped to my chest earlier that day. We knowingly transferred the deed, the $60,000 valuation. To avoid the auditors, I needed them to say yes to those phrases. At 6:30, the house was silent. The table was set with my best china and crystal wine glasses that caught the light. The candles were lit. The air smelled of roasting meat and expensive perfume. I stood at the head of the table, running my hand over the cool wood. My heart rate was steady. My hands were not shaking. I felt a strange, icy calm settling over me, the kind of focus I only ever felt right before destroying a hostile witness in a compliance hearing. "Showtime," I whispered to the empty room. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, piercing the silence of the house like a starter pistol. Ryan jumped, nearly knocking over a vase on the entry table. He was wearing an electric blue suit that was too tight in the shoulders and too shiny under the hallway lights, a stark contrast to the sleek, predatory elegance of my black armored dress. He looked like a game show host. I looked like the executioner. "Relax, honey," I said, smoothing his lapel with a touch that lingered just long enough to make him flinch. "It is just dinner." Ryan opened the door, his face splitting into a desperate, eager grin. "Silas, you made it." Silas Thorne stepped into my home, bringing a gust of cold night air and the scent of expensive cologne masking the smell of stale cigarettes. He was shorter than I expected, with veneered teeth that shone too brightly and eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched. Clinging to his arm was a woman I recognized immediately from Instagram Elena, the notary. She was chewing gum and scrolling on her phone, looking bored before she even crossed the threshold. "Ryan, my man," Silas said, clapping my husband on the back with false camaraderie. He thrust a bottle of wine toward me. "For the lady of the house, a little thank you for having us." I took the bottle. It was a generic red blend I knew sold for $12 at the corner liquor store. "How thoughtful," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed sarcasm that went completely over their heads. "I will let this breathe. In the meantime, we are drinking the 1996 Cabernet." I led them into the dining room, where the hidden cameras were blinking their silent red eyes from the bookshelves. I poured the wine, watching the dark liquid swirl into the crystal glasses. "So," I started, taking my seat at the head of the table, "Ryan tells me you are a genius when it comes to asset liquidation. Silas, He says you move fast. Silas leaned back, spreading his arms over the adjacent chairs as if he already owned the furniture. Speed is the name of the game. Harper. The market waits for no one. Most people are too emotional about their property. They hold on when they should let go. I agree, I said, taking a sip of wine. That is why I was so impressed with the Aspen deal. Selling a $1.5 million property for $60,000. That is a unique strategy. Most people would call that a loss, but you call it leverage. Right. The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Silas narrowed his eyes, studying me, looking for a trap. But Ryan, desperate to prove his worth to his idol, jumped in before Silas could speak. Exactly, Ryan blurted out, his voice pitched high with nerves. It is about tax efficiency. Harper, you keep looking at the sale price, but you are missing the back-end value. But 60,000? I pressed, leaning forward, my hand resting near the microphone taped beneath my dress. And the paperwork moved so quickly. I mean, I don't even remember signing the deed. It must have been a blur. Ryan laughed nervously, glancing at Silas for approval. Well, you know how busy you are, babe. You were buried in those compliance audits. I didn't want to bother you with the admin stuff. I just went ahead and signed it for you. To get the ball rolling. Bing. I tapped my fingernail against the rim of my wine glass, a sharp, clear sound. That was the signal. That was the confession. You signed it for me, I repeated, ensuring the words were clear for the recording, because I was too busy to understand the vision. It is just a signature, Ryan said, waving his hand dismissively. We are married. It is community property. I just helped the process along. I turned my gaze to Silas. And Obsidian Holdings. I tried to look up your firm, Silas, but I couldn't find a website. You guys are very exclusive. Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He took a long swig of the expensive wine. We are a ghost ship. Harper, we don't want a footprint. We come in, we strip the asset, we flip it, and the LLC dissolves before the ink is dry. That is how you avoid the red tape. If you have a website, you have liability. Fascinating, I said. And the notarization that must have been tricky without me being there. I looked at Elena. She looked up from her phone, swirling her glass. Oh, it was easy, she said, giggling. Silas just texted me the address. I have the stamp in my purse. Bam! Done. Nobody checks those logs anyway. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. They had given me everything. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy, notary fraud. They had just engaged in a round-table confession while eating my appetizers. I checked the watch on my wrist. It was 7:20. The timeline was perfect. Well, I said, standing up slowly and smoothing the front of my dress. I think we have covered all the important business details. You have all been so honest. Ryan looked up at me, confused by the shift in my tone. Where are you going? Babe, is dinner ready? Oh, yes, I said, looking toward the front door where I knew the team was waiting for my signal. It is time for the main course. I stood up slowly, the silk of my armored dress rustling against the chair. I picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against the rim of my crystal wine glass. The sharp, clear chime cut through the air, silencing the room instantly. Ryan looked up at me with a goofy, intoxicated grin, while Silas leaned back, picking his teeth with a look of bored arrogance. I would like to propose a toast, I said, my voice sweet and light. But first, I prepared a little something to celebrate our new partnership. I know how much you boys love data, so I put together a slide deck. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, Harper, you and your presentations. Always the professional. Always, I agreed. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen to cast the image to the 85-inch television mounted on the wall behind me. The screen flickered to life, bathing the dim dining room in a harsh, white light. The first slide appeared. It was not a graph of potential profits. It was a high-definition scan of the deed to my cabin. The forged signature of Harper Vance was zoomed in, pixelated and ugly, sitting right above Elena's notary stamp. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "I wanted to toast to the audacity," I said. My voice dropped an octave, shedding the warmth of the loving wife and replacing it with the cold, metallic timbre of the senior compliance director. "Because it takes a special kind of stupidity to forge the signature of a woman who audits fraud for a living." "Harper," Ryan stammered, his face draining of all color. "Harper, wait. I can explain." "Next slide," I said, tapping my phone. The screen changed. This time, it was a complex spreadsheet. It showed a timeline of Ryan's online gambling activity over the last 18 months, culminating in a total loss of $412,000. Beside it was a flowchart showing transfers from our joint account into Obsidian Holdings LLC. "This is not an investment strategy, Ryan," I said, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. "This is a panic move. You gambled away our savings on crypto and sports betting, and when you got in too deep, you sold my grandmother's house to cover your tracks." Ryan tried to stand up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Harper, stop! Turn it off! You don't understand. Sit down," I commanded. The volume was not loud, but the authority in my voice was absolute. It was the voice I used to fire executives. Ryan froze, his knees buckling, and he sank back into his chair as if physically pushed. I turned my eyes to Silas. He was no longer leaning back. He was sitting up straight, his eyes darting between me and the door. "And you," I said, taking a step toward him. "Silas Thorne, or should I say, the managing director of a dozen shell companies currently under investigation by the state of Delaware." Silas sneered, trying to regain control. "You don't know what you are talking about, lady. That was a legitimate sale. You bought a $1.5 million cabin for $60,000, I said, enunciating every syllable. "That is not a deal. Silas, that is a felony. Specifically, it is wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. And since you used the internet to facilitate the transfer, it is a federal crime." I clicked to the final slide. It was a screenshot of the text message I had intercepted from his phone to Ryan. "If you don't get the deed signed by Friday, I break your legs." "That looks like extortion to me," I noted calmly. Silas slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. His face twisted into a mask of violence. "You think you are smart. You have no idea who you are messing with. You think a little PowerPoint is going to stop me. I will ruin you." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the walls. "You will ruin me?" I asked, tilting my head. "Silas, I am a compliance officer. I hunt people like you for sport. I eat Risk for breakfast. I know where you bank. I know where you hide your assets. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. And you are not a businessman. You are just a liability." I looked at him with pure pity, and I just balanced the books. Silas stood up so abruptly that his chair tipped backward, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a deafening clatter. He looked at Elena, his eyes wide and feral, the slick arrogance completely gone. "Get your bag," he snapped at her, his voice tight. "We are leaving. Now!" Ryan looked between us, his face a mask of sweating, desperate confusion. He reached out across the table, his hand shaking so badly he knocked over his wine glass. The expensive Cabernet bled across the white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. "Harper, honey." "Please," he stammered, his voice rising in pitch as he tried to find purchase in the crumbling reality. "It is a joke. Okay, we can fix this. I can call the bank. Just stop this." He was trying to gaslight me one last time. He truly believed he could talk his way out of a federal indictment with a smile and a lie. He thought I was still the wife he could manipulate. It is too late for that. Ryan, I said. I pointed the remote at the television screen and clicked the button one final time. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by a live feed from the security camera mounted at the front gate. On the screen, 3 black SUVs were screeching to a halt in the driveway, their red and blue lights flashing silently in the snowy night. Men in tactical gear were already pouring out of the vehicles, moving in a tight, practiced formation toward the front porch. Ryan stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. Silas froze, his hand halfway to his jacket pocket. "I didn't make dinner for us," I said, setting the remote down gently on the table. "I made it for them." A split second later, a thunderous boom shook the front door. It was not a knock, it was a battering ram. The wood splintered with a sickening crack that echoed through the foyer. "FBI, open up federal agents!" The shouts were loud, overlapping, and terrifying. The illusion of my domestic sanctuary shattered instantly. A dozen agents swarmed into the dining room, their weapons drawn, their boots heavy on the floor. The chaotic noise of radios and shouting commands filled the air. Agent Miller entered last. He was not wearing tactical gear. He walked in with his hands in his pockets, calm amidst the storm. He looked at me, gave a single, respectful nod, and then turned his attention to the targets. Silas reacted on instinct. He bolted toward the sliding glass door that led to the back patio, shoving a chair into the path of an oncoming agent. He fumbled with the lock, threw the door open, and sprinted into the darkness of the yard. He did not make it 3 steps. "Down! Get on the ground!" screamed voices from the darkness. I watched through the glass as 2 agents tackled Silas into the snow. His face was pressed into the frozen grass, his expensive suit ruined in seconds. Inside, the scene was just as decisive. 2 agents grabbed Ryan. He did not fight. He just went limp. They pulled his arms behind his back, and I heard the distinct, metallic sound of handcuffs tightening. He looked up at me as they hauled him to his feet. His face was wet with tears and snot. His eyes filled with a look of utter betrayal, as if I were the one who had wronged him. "Why?" he sobbed, his voice breaking. "Harper, I am your husband. Why?" I walked around the table, my heels clicking on the floor. I stopped inches from his face. I could smell the fear on him. I leaned in close to his ear, whispering so only he could hear me over the chaos. "Because you stole my grandmother's house. Ryan," I whispered, my voice ice cold. "Did you think I would just write a bad Yelp review?" I pulled back and watched the realization hit him. He was not the victim. He was the mark. Across the room, Elena was screaming as an agent zip-tied her wrists. "It was just a stamp," she wailed. "I didn't do anything, he made me do it." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, spinning her around. I stood in the center of the room, untouched. The dinner party was in shambles. The wine was spilled, the food was getting cold, and my guests were being dragged away to federal holding cells. It was the most satisfying dinner I had ever hosted. The silence that followed the raid was deafening. The agents had marched the 3 of them out in handcuffs, a parade of misery passing by the expensive floral arrangements I had paid $500 for just that morning. I watched from the hallway as an agent carried out a clear plastic evidence bag containing Ryan's laptop. It was over. The chaos of the battering ram and the shouting had evaporated, leaving only the quiet hum of a house that had been purged. Agent Miller lingered in the foyer while his team finished logging the scene. He looked tired but satisfied, the adrenaline of the takedown fading into professional courtesy. "We have what we need, Mrs. Vance," he said, tucking a notepad into his pocket. "The deed transfer has been frozen immediately. Given the confession we recorded and the overwhelming evidence of fraud and coercion, the title will be administratively reverted to your name within the week. It is like the sale never happened." "Thank you, Agent Miller," I replied, keeping my posture rigid. I assume I won't be needing a lawyer for myself. He smirked, a rare break in his stoic demeanor. You are the star witness, Harper, not the suspect. We will be in touch regarding the trial dates. When the heavy front door finally clicked shut, locking out the flashing lights and the cold night, I was finally alone. I walked back into the dining room. The air still smelled of the roast beef I had never served and the lingering scent of Silas's cheap cologne. I sat at the head of the table, the seat of power, and reached for the bottle of 1996 Cabernet that was still breathing on the sideboard. I poured myself a full glass. My hand was steady. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood. I picked it up. It was a text message from Ryan's mother. Did the dinner go well? Ryan said he had big news to share. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I just felt done. I did not reply. I tapped the information button on her contact card, scrolled down to the bottom, and hit block caller. I took a long sip of the wine. It tasted like oak, berries, and absolute freedom. 2 weeks later, I sat in a glass-walled office downtown, sliding a copy of the official FBI incident report across a granite conference table to my divorce attorney. She read it, her eyes widening behind her designer glasses as she scanned the charges wire fraud. Grand larceny, conspiracy. This is leverage. Harper, she said, looking up at me. This is a nuclear weapon. I want an expedited annulment, I told her, my voice flat. Fraud vitiates consent. He married me under false pretenses to access my assets, and I want a permanent protective order. The process was clinical and swift, because the federal government had seized Ryan's assets to pay restitution for his gambling debts and the loans he had defrauded. There was nothing for him to fight with. I retained 100% of my assets, the cabin, the house. My retirement savings, they were all untouchable. Ryan, on the other hand, was facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison. His debts were his own. He had gambled on my stupidity, and he had lost everything. A month later, I stood on the deck of my cabin in Aspen. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and snow. I had hired a specialized cleaning crew to scrub the place from top to bottom before I arrived. I wanted every trace of Silas's buyers gone. I had them replace the locks, the carpets, and even the linens. It felt like mine again. I sat on the lounge chair, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, looking out at the mountains that Ryan had tried to sell for the price of a mid-range sedan. I thought about the man I had married. I realized that losing a husband was a small price to pay for gaining back my peace. I was not lonely. I was secure. I picked up my iPad to review the new security system I had installed that morning. Motion sensors, biometric locks, and cloud backups that notified me instantly of any unauthorized entry. No one would ever forge my name again. I minimized the security app and opened my file manager. There, sitting at the top of the list, was a folder labeled Ryan. It contained the screenshots, the recordings, the evidence of the life we used to have and the crime that ended it. I selected the folder. I hit delete. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item? I didn't hesitate. Goodbye. Ryan, I whispered to the mountain air. I tapped yes. The folder vanished, and the screen was clean. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I really want to connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear this story.